Hi there. Why exactly is socialism the superior system? In this video, I'll clarify a few basic points about just that. Hold on though, if you're wondering about why exactly capitalism sucks, well, I've made a video about that and you can find it here. Unlike that video though, I can't ever discuss socialism without someone bringing up the historical baggage, so I'll touch on that a little too. This video is timestamped, so feel free to jump around if you'd like. I'd like you to internalize something real quick for me though. Know that the vast majority of the criticism of socialism you hear is no more than projection of the fault of capitalism. Keep that tucked away in your mind as we go along. Let's get started. First of all, let's define socialism. It isn't when the government does stuff, nor is it what Sweden or France does. Socialism is a socioeconomic and political system that is the first step in the transition away from capitalism. To enumerate a few points, socialism is when political power and the state is in the hands of the working class, through vanguard parties, working class organizations, or otherwise. There is the nationalization of industry and collectivization of agriculture. There is the institution of a national economic plan for the development of the economy and society. There is a reorganization of workplaces from the top-down capitalist enterprise model to either state-owned or collective organization based on differing levels of self-management. There is suppression of markets, or elimination if possible, and the elimination of wage labor. There is necessary social reorganization in the form of a cultural revolution which seeks to support the creative and emancipatory political will of the people, as well as weed out reactionary ideas like racism and sexism, etc. through re-education and discussion, among several other things. Other strands of leftism may disagree with this characterization, for example the state thing for anarchists, and that's fine. I'm giving my perspective as a Marxist. With that said though, why is socialism better, exactly? Now I can list theoretical principles and ideals, but no matter how many times the scientific nature of socialism is reiterated, on evidence, we cannot seem to escape the claims of utopianism. In this case, I've decided to start off with empirical evidence, and then move on to those theoretical principles that underpin the superiority of socialism over capitalism. Socialism objectively provides a better quality of life. I've done a proper video about this before, but put simply, the vast majority of the time, socialism gave people a higher standard of living than capitalism, given equal levels of economic development. This is according to a paper by Saracetin and Waitskin that analyzed numerous factors relating to human quality of life relative to the level of economic development in each country presented. Within each level of economic development, socialist countries had infant mortality and child death rates approximately 2 to 3 times lower than the capitalist countries. Similar relationships emerged for life expectancy. Socialist countries consistently showed higher numbers of health professionals per population than capitalist countries at equivalent levels of economic development. The ratio of population per physician in a lower middle income and upper middle income socialist countries was similar to, or even higher than, that of high income capitalist countries. Socialist countries consistently showed equal or higher levels of enrollment in educational institutions. Not only that, but they provided high quality education facilities to the whole population regardless of race, religion, gender, language, or ethnicity. To quote the article, even in the wealthier capitalist countries, public health and educational policies have not achieved equitable access for low-income groups, racial minorities, and geographically isolated communities. In addition, socialist countries provided a higher daily per capita calorie supply as a percentage of requirement than did the capitalist countries at a similar level of development. Nutritional supply of all socialist countries exceeded the 100% requirement for healthy life and growth, unlike in the capitalist countries. So much for the communism no food meme. Put simply, in all three comparisons within given levels of development, socialist countries achieved much higher physical quality of life. Keep in mind, many of these countries achieved such staggering growth and development in the face of invasion, constant sabotage, economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and so much more from the US and its strategic allies. If you're interested in the details of the study, check out the original video, or the study itself, sources in the pinned comment as always. Now with that out of the way, let's get into it. Socialism serves the class interests of the largest group of society. The most fundamental thing to mention is that socialism isn't meant to appeal to everyone. It's only meant to appeal to the working class and associated classes that can be won over by common goals or diligent political work. When I say a goal of socialism is to reorganize workplaces along democratic principles, where all workers in the enterprise have a vote in what happens, rather than like in capitalist enterprises where only the shareholders and the board of directors have a say, no wonder those same shareholders and members of the board won't like what's being said. That's part of materialist analysis. Socialism aims to give the vast majority of people, that being the working class, political and economic power in society, something they lack on all fronts under capitalism. Unsurprisingly, that's attractive to the working class, and completely despised by the ruling class. If you're interested in how this form of political and economic power was exercised by historic socialist examples, check out my latest book recommendations video in the dedicated playlist. Our second point is the rational allocation of resources and the economic plan. The Marxian conception of socialism isn't utopian. Hell, Engels wrote a book about that very idea, which I strongly recommend you read. We understand that excesses and irrational allocation can occur under all systems. As humans, human error can occur. The difference is, though, unlike under capitalism, where the allocation of resources is towards that which is most profitable, damned be the cost, be it human, environmental, or usually both, under socialism, the allocation of resources is done according to need and rational economic planning, a point that will be touched on soon. This could even be done democratically, in the form of electronic state referendums on budgeting and expenditures, something Paul Cockshott has developed in his writings, and even discussed in Vietnam with relevant political groups in the country. I recommend you check out his work. This ties into the point prior, of the working class holding political power. Under capitalism, it is heresy to say, let alone demand, everyone have a say in the budgeting of the capitalist state. If that happened, how would Lockheed Martin make their money contracting for useless wars Americans don't want? And how would Amazon and Apple get away with not only dodging all their taxes, but also getting richer off of your tax dollars? Adding on to this, socialism aims for the founding of economic planning institutions and forming long-term economic plans for the development of the economy as well as society. Now, economic planning isn't something exclusive to socialism. South Korea and Japan used them under capitalist systems to much success in the few decades after World War II, and big business almost exclusively as a default plans their local economies. Walmart is a perfect example of this. The difference between that and modern socialist economic planning is twofold. Firstly, it's done not for the profits of a few, but for the improvement of society as a whole, and secondly, it is something that all of society has a say in, through the relevant workplaces, enterprises, and working class organization committees, be they party cells or otherwise. Historic socialisms did this to varying lengths, and modern developments can only expand and improve the level of democratic participation in said planning. The author just mentioned, Paul Cockshott, has an excellent book on the topic titled Towards a New Socialism that I highly recommend you check out. A side note. A frequent objection to all of this is the idea of the economic calculation problem, that there are simply too many inputs, outputs, and interactions in the economy for planning commissions to handle. That may have been the case in 1950, when most calculations were still done by hand, but this is no longer the case in the 21st century. Your smartphone can plan complex, multi-year plans for small economies. A decently fast computer can plan thorough plans for medium to large-sized economies, and modern supercomputers can plan astronomically convoluted plans for massive economies beyond human scope. Add on top of this, fancy math that reduces the sheer quantity of work, and you have something truly amazing. Success was achieved with the very primitive computers of the 1970s in Chile with Project Cybersyn, where economic sabotage, directed by the CIA and its lackeys on the ground, attempted to cripple the country's economy, but intelligent planning kept it going with a fraction of the resources available. Check out Medina's book titled Cybernetic Revolutionaries for an interesting dive. This was 50 years ago. Imagine what could be done now. Our third point is humanity over profit. This is an overarching point with many subpoints. The first of which is production for use rather than profit. Under capitalism, exchange values are predominant. What this means is that production on a whole is done with the intention of sale on the market. Things are considered for sale before they're considered for the full capacity of their use. As a result of this, simple changes like transitioning to more eco-friendly production of certain goods is unnecessarily tedious and requires a heavy hand from the capitalist state to get done, rather than simple shifting according to a coherent plan. Adding even further, capitalism has invented lovely concepts like planned obsolescence, where goods and products perfectly capable of functioning for many years have their lives artificially shortened, so that they break or fail more often to force consumers to, well, consume more. Imagine the sheer waste of human labor, damage to the environment, and general misery such ridiculousness brings about, and all for what? To line the pockets of a few who are already wealthy enough to make the pharaohs gaze in envy? Under socialism, production is made for use and maintenance, so that human effort expended can be used to maximize improvements in society, rather than make stuff that intentionally breaks. Another related subpoint is that of environment over profits. Unsurprisingly, a system not predicated on profit would result in proper investment with people's health and the environment's sustainability in mind. Unless there's planned economy without competition driving production, the environment will be completely destroyed. You cannot have a sustainable environment when every decision on what you do for energy, what you build, what resources and chemicals you use are driven by the needs of private capitalist corporations. Unless the system is ended, there will be irreversible changes to the environment that will make life as we know it something of the past. The rotten system has to come down to make room for that which will respect our common earth. It makes absolutely no sense to pollute rivers, to invade indigenous communities, to cause massive oil spills and bulldoze the Amazon under socialism because the system's purpose isn't endless profit and growth. Another related subpoint is the proper maintenance of human interactions and communities. Unlike under capitalism, where there is a direct push to atomize individuals and communities, to render them as single consumers for thorough manipulation and exploitation, under socialism, there's proper respect for community and collective existence. This doesn't mean the individual isn't important or doesn't exist. Socialism strives to respect the individual through maximizing their potential, for example through education, as well as value the family and collective. In general, capitalism tends towards alienation in all its forms. Socialism, on the other hand, wants an end to alienation. To quote Patrick Devin, socialists want an end to alienation from one another, society, the economy, and non-human nature. The capitalist mode of production, the transformation of all inputs used in the productive process into commodities, creates a state of generalized alienation. People are atomized and subject to an individualistic socioeconomic and cultural logic in which their underlying identity is reduced to that of worker and, in late-stage capitalism, consumer, competing against other workers and consumers. The unfolding of this relentless logic in the era of neoliberalism has seriously weakened and eroded the defensive collective institutions of social solidarity that developed in earlier periods of capitalist development, and has promoted relationships amongst people characterized by mistrust and self-seeking behavior. Far from increasing people's sense of well-being, capitalism has created a sense of insecurity, powerlessness, and unhappiness, accompanied by increasingly self-destructive and socially dysfunctional behavior. We shouldn't forget that we are social creatures. We built civilizations atop common cooperation and mutual gain. With modern scientific methods and proper awareness of each other and our diversity, both within and without, we can truly liberate ourselves. Doesn't that sound at least a little more exciting than grinding yourself down yet another day to make someone else way richer than you'd be in 100 lifetimes? Our fourth point is economic democracy. With socialism, one of the fundamental aims is to reorganize the enterprise, where you spend 8 hours of your day along democratic lines. As it stands now, you work in an economic dictatorship. You do what you're told, whenever you're told, and you have absolutely no say in the running of your workplace or any other important decision, despite the fact that without you and others like you, the enterprise itself wouldn't exist. Instead, a small clique at the very top, usually the board of directors, controls the levers. Remember what I said at the beginning of the video? This is one of those instances of projection on capitalism's part. Under socialism, enterprises would be horizontally organized, where all workers have a say in how things are done, with proper voting and accounting for all. You yourself, along with your fellow employees, decide how to work, what to produce, at what rate, to which agencies, with what resources, all according to your relative specialities and according to scientific analysis and democratic consensus. Under capitalism, how can you say you truly live in a democracy when in the place you spend most of your waking hours, you can't question anything, let alone give your input? Related is that socialism eliminates capitalist exploitation through forcible surplus extraction and replaces it with work for oneself and work for society. Rather than working a few hours to meet your wage and the rest of the workday to produce profit for the capitalist, under socialism, you work under contract at your enterprise where you separate your work into the surplus produced to meet your needs and the surplus produced that goes into a common social fund that is used for the development and maintenance of society as a whole. Realize this is no tax. As under capitalism, 50% of the output you produce goes to the capitalist, and from the 50% that goes to you, the capitalist state also takes a cut, bringing it down to 40%, 30%, or even 20% in some countries. Our fifth point, the elimination of boom and bust cycles. An unsurprising and boring point, but socialism doesn't experience boom and bust cycles, and doesn't randomly crash every 5 to 7 years, like capitalism does. This is because socialism is carried out according to an economic plan with proper accounting, so the standard overproduction to destruction of excess pipeline that capitalism exhibits simply doesn't exist. That, and because production is done for use values rather than exchange values, and markets are suppressed. The very mechanism for boom and bust cycles isn't present. Point number 6. The maximum life standard for as many people as possible. Socialism, unlike capitalism, makes an active effort of fighting inequality and for providing the absolute vast majority of people with the bare necessities they need. I'm not talking only food and shelter, something the richest country on earth, the ever grand USA, doesn't even do. I mean those things people need for a dignified existence. I mean developed education at all levels, high quality and plentiful healthcare, dignified employment, and opportunities for creative expression. Culture clubs, youth houses, free expansive public parks, and beautiful environments. Things that make you happy to be alive, even. Socialism allows for the creative liberation of the vast majority of humanity through these methods, and does so off the sweat of collective effort, unlike the European social democracies, which do so off the backs of brown and black bodies from imperial periphery countries. We produce enough food to meet the needs of billions more than actually exist, yet people still starve. Modern computing and the internet have made full and expansive education a possibility for everyone, yet only 6% of the world's population has university degrees. Year by year, economies and workers get more and more efficient, yet the waste of labor and resources is unimaginable. As a species, we not only can do better, we need to do better. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that it's all like a Disney fairy tale. Socialist countries haven't always eliminated inequality completely, but they got a hell of a lot farther than any capitalist country to date. Socialism doesn't know homelessness and doesn't know unemployment. This system simply makes those things practically impossible, and the empirical evidence proves this. So conclusion. Let's not get too carried away in dreaming of the future. This doesn't mean that socialism has solved all issues that exist, or that every single historical socialist society was heaven on earth, and every future socialist society will be without fault. Not at all. What is meant, though, is that the contradictions of socialism are less severe, and overall do not possess society-ruining defects that destroy the lives of millions every couple of years like capitalism does. Socialism doesn't build into itself massive homelessness and unemployment. It doesn't force people to humiliating slave jobs for their bare necessities. It doesn't force people with master's degrees to work 3 jobs to feed their children. Socialism, at the end of the day, is a superior system because it allows us to be human, and to live life not as a relentless grind into the grave, a pathetic get-rich-or-die-trying race. It allows us instead to appreciate that which we have, and to look optimistically into the future. With that said, though, we should stress that this isn't utopianism. To achieve any of this, proper theoretical foundation through reading is required. Violent struggle might also be a must to push humanity into its next stage. No ruling class has ever given up their power peacefully. This isn't to fearmonger, but to set realistic expectations. In order to win, we have to dare to win. This requires principled and highly motivated working class groups and parties, who have done their proper research and are willing to fight for this future. To quote Guevara, "Revolution isn't an apple that falls from a tree. You have to make it fall."